The Man from Taured. On a humid July morning in 1954, a well-dressed European businessman stepped off a commercial flight at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. He appeared completely ordinary until he presented his passport to customs officials. The document looked authentic, bearing official seals and stamps from multiple countries, but it listed his nationality as Taured, a country that didn't exist anywhere on Earth. The man spoke fluent Japanese and several European languages. He carried legitimate-looking business documents, international currency, and a driver's license from Taured. When questioned about his homeland, he calmly explained that Taured was a small European nation located between France and Spain, where our maps show the Principality of Andorra. He seemed genuinely confused by the officials' insistence that no such country existed. Airport authorities examined his passport with increasing bewilderment. The document appeared genuine in every detail, printed on proper passport paper with authentic-looking security features. The entry stamps showed he had traveled extensively throughout Europe and Asia, with customs officials from multiple countries having apparently accepted his Tauridian citizenship without question. His business papers indicated he was in Japan for meetings with local companies, and he possessed hotel reservations and return flight tickets. The man's confusion deepened when officials showed him maps of Europe. He pointed confidently to the location where he insisted Taured should be, becoming increasingly agitated when they showed him that only Andorra existed in that region. He claimed that Taured had been established over 1,000 years earlier and maintained diplomatic relations with countries worldwide. His knowledge of European geography was otherwise perfect, making his insistence about Taured even more puzzling. Japanese authorities detained him overnight in a hotel room under guard while they investigated his claims. They contacted immigration officials in the countries whose stamps appeared in his passport, but none had any record of issuing entry visas to anyone from Taured. The companies he claimed to be meeting with had never heard of him or his supposed business. By morning, the man had vanished completely. The hotel room showed no signs of forced entry or escape. The windows were sealed and under surveillance. His passport, documents, and luggage had disappeared with him, leaving no trace of his existence. Hotel security cameras showed no one entering or leaving his room after he was escorted inside. The guards posted outside his door insisted no one had passed them during the night. Investigators discovered that airline records showed his seat on the incoming flight had been occupied, but passenger manifests contained no mention of anyone from Taured. The flight crew remembered checking his ticket and passport during boarding, but their recollections became vague and contradictory when pressed for details. It was as if reality itself had conspired to erase any evidence of his presence. The case was quietly classified and removed from official records. Airport personnel were instructed never to discuss the incident, and most documentation was destroyed. Only fragmentary reports survived in personal files of the investigators, who continued to whisper about the impossible visitor for decades afterward. The man from Taured had appeared from nowhere and vanished just as mysteriously, leaving behind only questions about the nature of reality and the possibility that our world occasionally intersects with others, where history unfolded differently. The Missing Woman. In August 1901, two distinguished English academics, Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, took what they assumed would be a pleasant afternoon walk through the gardens of Versailles Palace. Both women held advanced degrees and were known for their rational, scholarly approach to life. Neither believed in supernatural phenomena or had any interest in the occult. What they experienced that day would challenge their understanding of reality and create one of history's most documented encounters with people from an alternate timeline. The women had been exploring the palace grounds when they decided to visit the Petit Trianon, Marie Antoinette's private retreat. As they walked through the gardens, the atmosphere began to change in ways they couldn't immediately explain. The afternoon light seemed to dim despite clear skies, and an oppressive feeling of melancholy settled over them. The sounds of modern Paris faded away, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by distant music and conversation. They encountered several people dressed in elaborate 18th century clothing who seemed to be going about their daily activities as if it were perfectly normal. Near a small bridge, they spoke with two men in period dress who gave them directions in archaic French. The men appeared solid and real, responding naturally to questions about the path to the pedestrian. Their clothing showed the wear and detail of actual garments rather than theatrical costumes. As they continued walking, both women noticed that the landscape itself had changed. Gardens appeared where there should have been open lawns. Buildings stood in locations where they knew modern structures existed. The paths they followed seemed to lead through areas that had been redesigned decades earlier. Most remarkably, they observed a woman in elegant 18th-century dress sitting on the grass near a small building, sketching in the afternoon light. The woman looked up at them with mild curiosity before returning to her artwork. Her face was aristocratic and refined, with distinctive features that both academics would later recognize from historical portraits. Her hair was powdered and styled in the elaborate fashion of the late 1700s. Her dress was made of fine silk, with intricate embroidery that showed the craftsmanship of royal seamstresses. Everything about her appearance suggested nobility of the highest rank. The woman's location was significant. She sat precisely where historical records indicated Marie Antoinette spent her final summer afternoons in 1789, just months before the French Revolution would destroy everything she knew. The building behind her matched architectural plans from that exact period, though it had been modified extensively by 1901. The gardens around her corresponded to layouts that existed only in the 1780s. As the English women watched, other figures in period dress moved through the gardens. Gardeners worked with tools that belonged to an earlier century. Courtiers strolled along paths in elaborate wigs and formal attire. Musicians played instruments in the distance. The entire scene appeared to be a perfect recreation of court life in the final years of the old regime. But these weren't actors or reenactors. The people they observed seemed unaware they were being watched and went about their activities with the natural ease of individuals living their normal lives. The experience ended as suddenly as it had begun. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, the period clothing vanished, and Moberly and Jourdain found themselves back in the familiar gardens of 1901. They completed their walk to the Petit Trianon in confused silence, both reluctant to discuss what they had witnessed until they were safely back in their hotel. Being scholars, they began a methodical investigation that would consume the next decade of their lives. Working separately to avoid influencing each other's memories, they researched every detail of their experience. They studied architectural plans of Versailles from different periods, examined portraits of the 18th century courtiers, and investigated the daily routines of Marie Antoinette and her circle. Their findings were extraordinary. Every person they had encountered could be identified from historical records. The men who gave them directions matched descriptions of specific courtiers known to frequent the gardens. The woman they had seen sketching corresponded exactly to contemporary accounts of Marie Antoinette's appearance and habits. Even minor details like the placement of garden features and the styles of clothing matched historical documentation from the summer of 1789. Most compelling was their knowledge of architectural details that weren't publicly available in 1901. They described buildings, paths, and landscape features that matched private archives and engineering drawings held by the French government. They had somehow observed Versailles exactly as it existed in the final months before the Revolution, complete with people who had been dead for over a century. The disappearing photograph. Sarah Chen discovered the impossible image while scrolling through her Instagram feed on an ordinary Tuesday evening in 2019. Among the familiar photos of friends and family was a selfie of herself that she had never taken. The image showed her standing in her apartment, smiling at the camera with natural confidence. But something was wrong. The person in the photograph looked like her, but wasn't quite her. The differences were subtle, but unmistakable. The woman in the photo had the same facial structure, the same hair color, and wore identical clothing to what Sarah remembered wearing that day. But her smile was slightly different, more confident and relaxed than Sarah's typical expression. Her posture showed a subtle variation in how she carried herself. Most disturbing of all, the background showed her apartment arranged in ways that didn't match reality. Furniture appeared in different positions than Sarah remembered placing it. A painting hung on a wall where she knew she had never mounted anything. Books on shelves were arranged differently, and some titles were completely unfamiliar, despite appearing to be in her handwriting. The lighting in the room came from angles that didn't match her actual lamp placement. Everything looked like her life, but organized by someone with slightly different preferences and habits. Sarah checked the metadata on the photograph and found it had been uploaded from her own device at a time when she distinctly remembered being asleep. The technical details showed it was taken with her phone's camera using settings she never used. The GPS coordinates placed the photo at her exact address, but the timestamp corresponded to a moment when her phone had been charging on her nightstand while she slept. She examined her phone's photo library and found no trace of the original image. According to her device, the photo existed only on Instagram, uploaded automatically through settings she had never activated. Her phone's memory showed no record of taking any photos during the time period when the image was supposedly captured. The Instagram post had generated likes and comments from friends who recognized her, but none of them noticed anything unusual about the photograph. The comments revealed another disturbing detail. Friends referenced conversations and events that Sarah had no memory of experiencing. They mentioned a dinner party she had supposedly hosted the previous weekend, complete with specific details about food and guests. They talked about a job interview she had allegedly attended, discussing outcomes and impressions she had never shared because the interview had never occurred. Their responses suggested an alternate version of her life where different choices had led to different experiences. Sarah began investigating further and discovered other anomalies in her digital footprint. Social media posts appeared under her name, discussing opinions she didn't hold and experiences she hadn't had. Email conversations existed in her account with people she had never contacted, arranging meetings and making plans for activities that never happened in her timeline. Her browser history showed searches for topics that didn't interest her and websites she had never visited. Most unsettling was evidence of a parallel relationship. Photos showed her with a man she had never met, tagged in locations she had never visited, at events she had never attended. The images spanned several months and showed a progression of intimacy that suggested a serious romantic relationship. The man appeared in multiple photos across different social media platforms, always with the alternate version of Sarah, who smiled more confidently and seemed more outgoing than her actual personality. Friends began mentioning this mysterious boyfriend in casual conversation, describing him as if Sarah had introduced them personally. They shared memories of double dates and group activities that Sarah had no recollection of participating in. When she insisted she had never met the man, her friends became confused and concerned, suggesting she might be experiencing memory problems or stress-related amnesia. The digital evidence suggested that somewhere, in a parallel timeline, another version of Sarah was living a different life. This alternate Sarah had made different choices, developed different relationships, and created different memories. Somehow, their digital footprints had become entangled, allowing glimpses of one life to bleed through into the other. The Instagram photo wasn't just an impossible image, it was a window into an alternate version of her existence, where small differences in personality and decision-making had led to a completely different path. The call from himself. David Martinez was driving home from work on Interstate 95 when his phone rang. The caller ID showed his own name and number, which should have been impossible since he was holding the device. Against his better judgment, he answered the call and heard his own voice speaking words he wasn't saying. The conversation that followed defied all logic. The other David spoke with the same vocal patterns and mannerisms, but discussed events that had never occurred. He mentioned a promotion at work that David had been passed over for months earlier. He talked about their mother's recovery from an illness that had actually proven fatal 2 years prior. Most disturbingly, he referenced a wife named Jennifer, whom David had never met, describing their recent anniversary dinner in vivid detail. As the conversation continued, both Davids began comparing their lives and discovered a pattern of divergence. The other David lived in the same apartment, but had furnished it differently. He drove the same model car, but in a different color. He worked for the same company, but in a department that didn't exist in David's timeline. Their childhood memories matched perfectly until around age 16, when their life paths began to separate in subtle but significant ways. The vanishing neighbors. David described a world where Torres had lived on Elm Street for 15 years and knew every neighbor by name. News stories that David remembered. She prided herself on being the kind of person who remembered birthdays, political elections, watered plants during vacations. Natural always had a spare key when someone locked themselves out. Popular movies had starred different That's why actors. She noticed immediately these weren't major changes that would have reshaped civilization by people who insisted minor variations always lived there. Suggested parallel the change happened running overnight without explanation, slight modifications. During the 20-minute conversation, Rebecca waved pulled over to concentrate on the impossible dialogue. He recorded the call on a second completely different family, clear audio of both voices and walking simultaneously. When Rebecca approached, technical analysis later confirmed new both voices showed identical vocal patterns, looked at her with confused amusement and speech explained they had lived in the house for 12 Linguistic years. Experts who examined the recording details about the same person had only long-time residents would know. But the time they remembered the ice storm of 2018 when his alternate self had damaged the oak tree in their front yard. The call ended abruptly. They discussed the previous owners of various houses with Interstate 95 that matched Rebecca's own memories. David looked around and realized he was even knew about the underground water main break. Both versions had been driving the same route 3 years earlier. Somehow occupying the same physical space while existing in different timelines recently acquired. More as the line went dead, other neighbors David's phone showed no record of any incoming calls. The call log when she asked about Janet recording her husband Mike, only silence longtime residents looked at her clear audio moments earlier. Mrs. Patterson, who had lived across the street for 25 years, insisted that the Pratts had always been their neighbors. She pulled out photo albums from neighborhood gatherings that clearly showed the Pratt family at events Rebecca remembered attending with the Hendersons. The physical evidence supported the impossible narrative. The house still contained modifications that Mike Henderson had made to the garage and garden. The fence he had installed 3 years earlier remained exactly as he had built it. The mailbox bore the Henderson name painted in Mike's distinctive handwriting, but when Rebecca pointed this out, everyone else saw the Pratt name instead. She was the only person who could see the Henderson name, while everyone else insisted she was misreading obvious lettering. Rebecca found photographs on her phone showing herself with Janet Henderson at various neighborhood events. But when she showed these images to other neighbors, they saw the Pratt family instead. The same faces that Rebecca recognized as the Hendersons appeared to everyone else as people they had known for over a decade. The metadata on the photos confirmed they were taken at the dates and locations Rebecca remembered, but the visual content had somehow changed to show different people. The situation became more complex when Rebecca discovered that official records supported both versions of reality simultaneously. Property records showed the house had been sold to the Hendersons in 2011, but also contained documentation of the Pratts purchasing the same property in 2010. Both sets of records appeared authentic and were filed properly with the county clerk's office. Insurance policies, utility bills, and tax records existed for both families covering overlapping time periods. The Pratt family themselves seemed unaware of any discrepancy. They displayed family photos spanning their alleged 12 years in the house, showing their children growing up in the same rooms where Rebecca had visited the Henderson children. They knew intimate details about the house's quirks and history that suggested genuine long-term residents. Their neighbors treated them with the familiarity of people who had shared years of daily interactions. Most unsettling was Rebecca's gradual realization that she might be the one who didn't belong. As days passed, she began finding evidence that suggested her own memories might be from an alternate timeline. Mail arrived addressed to people she had never heard of but who claimed to be her longtime neighbors. Her own house appeared in neighborhood photos she had never seen, taken at events she didn't remember attending. The duplicate child. Linda Walsh was picking up her 7-year-old daughter Emma from school when she saw something that froze her blood. Walking across the playground, hand in hand with another parent, was Emma, not a child who looked like Emma, but her exact daughter, wearing the same clothes and backpack, with the same scraped knee from falling off her bike 2 days earlier. Linda watched in stunned silence as this impossible duplicate interacted naturally with classmates who seemed to accept her presence without question. The other, Emma, laughed with the same distinctive giggle, showed the same shy hesitation around unfamiliar adults, and even favored her left hand in the same way her daughter did when carrying her backpack. Every mannerism and physical characteristic matched perfectly. The woman accompanying the duplicate Emma appeared to be another version of Linda herself. Same hair color and style, same height and build, even wearing a similar outfit to what Linda had chosen that morning. This alternate Linda moved with familiar gestures and expressions, chatting easily with other parents who responded as if they had known her for years. The conversation suggested a history of school involvement and neighborhood connections that paralleled Linda's own experiences. When Linda approached the school office to report what she assumed must be an emergency situation, she found the staff confused by her concerns. The principal showed her enrollment records for 2 different Emma Walshes, both with identical birth dates and parent information. One Emma was listed in Mrs. Johnson's 2nd grade class, while the other attended Mrs. Peterson's class down the hall. According to school records, both children had been enrolled since kindergarten and had completed identical academic assessments with nearly identical results. The administrative assistant pulled up digital photos from various school events throughout the year. The images clearly showed both Emma and her duplicate participating in the same activities on different dates. The spring concert program listed Emma Walsh, performing in 2 separate songs with 2 different classes. Field trip permission slips bore signatures from both versions of Linda authorizing their respective daughters to attend the same educational outings. Medical records at the school nurse's office contained documentation for both children. Each Emma had received the same vaccinations, reported the same minor injuries, and shown the same mild allergy to peanuts. The files included emergency contact information for both versions of Linda, listing different phone numbers that both connected to her actual device when called. Health screening results showed identical height, weight, and vision measurements taken on different dates. Teachers described both children with the same level of familiarity that comes from months of daily interaction. Mrs. Johnson spoke about Emma's particular talent for creative writing and her tendency to daydream during math lessons. Mrs. Peterson described an Emma with identical characteristics, mentioning the same creative abilities and attention patterns. Both teachers had parent-teacher conference notes documenting conversations with Linda about the same academic strengths and areas for improvement. The duplicate situation extended beyond school grounds. Linda discovered that neighborhood families knew both versions of her daughter. The ice cream truck driver remembered selling treats to 2 different Emmas on the same afternoon routes. The local library had checkout records showing both children borrowing books simultaneously, often selecting the same titles on different days. Even Emma's pediatrician had appointment records for 2 patients with identical medical histories and family backgrounds. Most disturbing was Emma's own reaction when Linda finally brought her to see the duplicate. Her daughter showed no surprise or confusion at meeting herself. Instead, she waved cheerfully at her other version and began chatting as if they were old friends who happened to share the same name and appearance. The 2 Emmas compared notes about their respective classes and teachers, discussing their parallel school experiences with the casual ease of children arranging a playdate. The conversation between the 2 Emmas revealed details that made Linda question the nature of reality itself. Both children remembered the same family vacation to the beach last summer, but described different hotels and different weather. They compared notes about their grandmother's birthday party, agreeing on the date and presents, but recalling different cakes and different guests. Each Emma possessed memories of events that the other had experienced differently, as if their lives had followed parallel paths with subtle variations at every turn. Linda found herself documenting these differences obsessively. She recorded conversations between the 2 versions of her daughter, noting how they would finish each other's sentences while describing completely different versions of the same experiences. The duplicate Emma knew family inside jokes and personal details that only her real daughter should know, but interpreted them through the lens of slightly different memories. When asked about their father's job, one Emma said he worked at the bank downtown, while the other insisted he had always been employed at the credit union across town. The phenomenon seemed to be spreading. Other parents began reporting similar duplications of their own children appearing in different classrooms. The school administration, rather than treating this as an emergency, appeared to accept the situation as normal. They scheduled separate parent-teacher conferences for both versions of each duplicated child and maintained detailed academic records that somehow accommodated impossible enrollment numbers without anyone questioning the logistics. The temporal businessman. Hotel manager Patricia Vance had worked in hospitality for 23 years, but she had never encountered a guest like the man in room 237. He checked in on October 15, 2018, carrying vintage luggage and wearing a perfectly tailored suit that appeared to be from the 1940s. His reservation had been made months in advance, paid for with cash that had been removed from circulation decades earlier. The guest, who registered as Thomas Whitmore, presented identification that looked authentic but showed issue dates from the 1940s. His driver's license bore the seal of a state motor vehicle department that had changed its design format in 1952. His business cards advertised a company that had ceased operations in 1949, complete with a telephone exchange system that hadn't been used since the early 1950s. When the front desk staff called the number printed on his card, they reached a functioning business line where someone answered with the company name and offered to connect them to Mr. Whitmore's office. Whitmore's knowledge of current events was peculiar and selective. He discussed recent political developments with surprising accuracy, but seemed confused by references to technology that had become commonplace decades earlier. He asked the concierge about restaurants that had closed in the 1960s as if they were still operating. When directed to modern establishments, he expressed amazement at menu prices and payment methods, fumbling with credit card readers as if encountering them for the first time. The hotel security cameras captured Whitmore's activities throughout his 3-day stay, but the footage showed inconsistencies that troubled the technical staff. In some recordings, he appeared as a normal guest moving through the lobby and hallways. In others, he seemed translucent, with background objects visible through his body. Several cameras recorded him having conversations with people who didn't appear in the footage, gesturing and responding to invisible companions with a natural flow of business discussions. Housekeeping staff reported unusual conditions in room 237 during Whitmore's stay. The room's telephone would ring at regular intervals, but when answered, the caller would ask to speak with employees who had worked at the hotel decades earlier. The hotel's records showed that several of the requested individuals had indeed been employed there, but had retired or died years before Whitmore's arrival. When housekeepers explained that these people were no longer available, the callers would express confusion and insist they had just spoken with them the previous day. Whitmore's business activities appeared to involve companies and contacts from different time periods. Hotel staff observed him conducting phone meetings, where he discussed market conditions and business opportunities that referenced economic situations from the 1940s and 1950s. He mentioned stock prices and commodity values that corresponded to historical data from decades earlier. His appointment calendar, which he left open on the desk, showed meetings scheduled with executives from companies that had merged, dissolved, or been renamed long before 2018. On his final morning, Whitmore approached the front desk to settle his bill and request assistance with transportation to the airport. He paid with more vintage currency, this time including silver certificates and bills featuring designs that had been discontinued for decades. When the desk clerk explained that this currency was no longer accepted legal tender, Whitmore seemed genuinely surprised and offered to exchange it at the bank across the street, apparently unaware that banking regulations had changed significantly since his money was issued. The taxi driver who transported Whitmore to the airport later contacted the hotel with questions about his passenger. According to the driver, Whitmore had requested to be taken to an airline terminal that had been demolished and rebuilt in the 1970s. When they arrived at the modern airport, Whitmore appeared confused by the architecture and signage, asking repeatedly about airlines that no longer existed and flight procedures that hadn't been used for decades. The driver watched him approach a ticket counter, but security footage from the airport showed no record of anyone matching his description entering the building. Hotel records indicated that Whitmore had made his reservation by telephone 6 months earlier, speaking with a desk clerk who had documented the conversation in detail. The reservation system showed his contact information and special requests, including a preference for a room on a high floor with a view of the city's business district. However, when investigators tried to verify his information, they discovered that the phone number he had provided was disconnected and had been out of service since 1987. The strangest aspect of Whitmore's stay was revealed through the hotel's historical records. Archive files from the 1940s showed documentation of previous visits by a Thomas Whitmore, who had stayed in room 237 on multiple occasions between 1946 and 1949. The signatures on the old registration cards match the handwriting sample from his 2018 visit perfectly. Photographs from the hotel's promotional materials in the 1940s showed a man who appeared identical to their recent guest, wearing the same style of clothing and carrying the same vintage luggage. The interdimensional interview. Marketing executive Jennifer Park arrived for what she believed was a routine job interview at a downtown office building, but found herself in a conference room with people who seemed to know her intimately, despite being complete strangers. The interview panel greeted her by name and referenced work projects she had never been involved with, discussing her performance on campaigns she had never heard of for companies that didn't exist in her reality. The lead interviewer, a woman named Sandra Chen, spoke as if they were old colleagues reuniting after a brief separation. She mentioned Jennifer's innovative approach to a beverage advertising campaign that had supposedly won industry awards the previous year. Chen described specific creative strategies and budget allocations with the confidence of someone who had worked closely with Jennifer on successful projects. The other panel members nodded in agreement, adding details about meetings and presentations they claimed to have attended together. Jennifer's confusion deepened when they showed her a portfolio of work bearing her name and creative signature. The campaigns were sophisticated and professional, displaying a design aesthetic that matched her style but featuring brands and products she had never encountered. The portfolio contained client testimonials praising her creativity and strategic thinking, complete with contact information for companies that didn't appear in any business directories she could access later. During the interview, the panel discussed industry trends and market conditions that differed significantly from Jennifer's knowledge of the advertising world. They referenced successful campaigns by competitors she had never heard of and mentioned regulatory changes that hadn't occurred in her timeline. Their conversation suggested a parallel advertising industry where different companies dominated the market and different creative approaches had proven successful. The office environment itself felt familiar yet wrong. The building layout matched one where Jennifer had interviewed previously, but the company logos and department signage were completely different. Conference rooms were located where she expected them, but decorated with awards and company memorabilia from organizations that didn't exist in her world. The view from the windows showed the same city skyline, but with different corporate logos on prominent buildings. Most unsettling was the panel's assumption that Jennifer was considering leaving her current position at Morrison & Associates to return to their company. They spoke about her previous employment with them as if it were established fact, discussing her departure 2 years earlier as a temporary career move that everyone expected would eventually bring her back. Jennifer had never worked for their company and had never heard of Morrison & Associates, despite their detailed knowledge of her supposed employment history there. The interview concluded with an offer that assumed Jennifer's acceptance. They discussed salary figures that were significantly higher than industry standards, benefit packages that included perquisites she had never heard of, and a start date that accommodated what they claimed was her standard notice period. The contract they presented bore her name and included personal details that were accurate, but had somehow been obtained without her providing them. When Jennifer left the building, she discovered that the company directory in the lobby showed no listing for the organization that had just interviewed her. The floor she had visited appeared to be occupied by a completely different business, and building security had no record of any interviews being scheduled that day. Her attempts to contact the interviewers using the business cards they had provided connected to phone numbers that were either disconnected or answered by people who had never heard of the company names printed on the cards. The meeting of minds. Neuroscientist Dr. Amanda Foster was conducting routine brain imaging research when she encountered a test subject who appeared to share her exact memories and experiences. The volunteer, introduced as Dr. Amanda Foster from a parallel research facility, possessed identical academic credentials, had conducted the same experiments, and could discuss Foster's unpublished research findings with complete accuracy. The parallel, Amanda explained that she was participating in the same study, but from the perspective of a test subject rather than principal investigator. She described arriving at what she believed was a different university to undergo experimental brain scanning procedures. Both women had received identical grant funding for the same research project, worked with the same graduate students who bore different names, and published papers in journals that existed in only one of their respective realities. During the brain scanning session, both Amandas were monitored simultaneously using identical equipment. The neuroimaging results showed brain activity patterns that were perfectly synchronized, despite the two women being unaware of each other's thought processes. When one Amanda concentrated on specific memories, the corresponding regions in the other's brain showed identical activation patterns. Their neural responses mirrored each other with precision that exceeded what would be expected from identical twins. The conversation between the two researchers revealed a systematic pattern of parallel development. Both had pursued neuroscience after experiencing the same childhood head injury that sparked their interest in brain function. They had attended universities with the same names but located in different cities, studied under professors who shared identical research interests but different personal histories, and developed theories about consciousness that were conceptually identical but expressed through different experimental methodologies. Their research findings complemented each other in impossible ways. The parallel Amanda had discovered aspects of neural plasticity that perfectly filled gaps in Foster's own work. Together, their combined knowledge formed a complete theory of consciousness that neither could have developed independently. They realized they were essentially two halves of the same research program, pursuing identical goals through slightly different experimental approaches and parallel realities. The brain imaging data revealed something unprecedented in neuroscience literature. When both Amandas focused on the same memory simultaneously, their brain scans showed quantum entanglement effects between corresponding neural networks. Areas of their brains appeared to be communicating across dimensional boundaries, sharing information through mechanisms that violated everything known about the physical limitations of consciousness. Most disturbing was their discovery that their research subjects overlapped between realities. Graduate students working with one Amanda would occasionally reference experiments and data from the other's laboratory. Research participants would arrive for appointments they had never scheduled, carrying consent forms signed by the alternate researcher. Equipment would show usage logs and calibration data from experiments that had never been conducted in that particular timeline. The parallel Amanda revealed that her reality contained published research papers authored by Foster's version, appearing in academic journals under her name, despite having been written by someone she had never met. Citation networks showed extensive academic collaboration between the two researchers spanning several years, with footnotes referencing private conversations and shared insights that had never occurred in either individual timeline. When the scanning session ended, both researchers attempted to maintain contact across dimensional boundaries. They developed experimental protocols designed to facilitate communication between their parallel laboratories, using quantum field generators to create localized space-time distortions that might allow information transfer. Their preliminary results suggested that consciousness itself might exist partially outside normal temporal constraints, enabling awareness to bridge realities under specific neurological conditions. The case remained classified within academic circles due to its implications for understanding the nature of consciousness and reality. Both universities removed all documentation of the interdimensional research from their official records, citing concerns about the psychological impact on other researchers and the potential for widespread academic disruption if the existence of parallel scholarly communities became known. The family that never was. Real estate agent Michael Thompson was showing a house to potential buyers when he encountered a family living there who insisted they had owned the property for 8 years. The problem was that Thompson had been managing the property as a rental for the past decade, and it had been vacant for 3 months. Yet the Martinez family had furniture, personal belongings, and utility bills that proved their residence at an address where they shouldn't exist. Carlos Martinez showed Thompson around what he claimed was his home, pointing out renovations he had made to the kitchen and improvements to the backyard landscaping. The modifications were clearly visible and professionally done, but Thompson's records showed no permits had been issued for such work. The family's children had decorated their bedrooms with posters and personal items, and Mrs. Martinez had established an elaborate garden that would have taken years to mature to its current state. The utility companies confirmed that the Martinez family had been paying electric, water, and gas bills for the property continuously for 8 years. Their payment history showed no gaps or late fees, and customer service representatives treated them as long-time, reliable customers. The Postal Service had been delivering mail to Carlos Martinez at that address since 2014, and neighbors confirmed they had known the family for nearly a decade. School records showed that the Martinez children had been enrolled in the local elementary school using that address for their entire academic careers. Teachers knew them well and had documentation of parent-teacher conferences, with Carlos and his wife dating back to kindergarten. The children's academic files contained years of report cards, standardized test scores, and extracurricular activity participation records that established their continuous residence in the district. Most puzzling was the mortgage documentation. The Martinez family possessed legal papers showing they had purchased the house in 2014 with a conventional 30-year mortgage. Their bank statements showed regular monthly payments to a lender who confirmed the loan's existence and good standing. Property tax records listed Carlos Martinez as the homeowner, and the county had been sending tax bills to his name at that address for 8 years without any discrepancies or disputes. Thompson's own records contradicted everything the family could prove. His files showed the property had been owned by an elderly woman who had died in 2011, leaving the house to her estate. The estate had hired Thompson's agency to manage it as a rental property while legal proceedings determined its final disposition. He had tenant records, rental agreements, and maintenance logs spanning the entire period when the Martinez family claimed to be living there as owners. The situation became more complex when both versions of reality produced valid legal documentation. The county clerk's office contained property deeds showing both the estate's ownership and the Martinez family's purchase of the same property. 2 separate insurance policies covered the house during overlapping time periods, with different companies insuring the same structure for different owners simultaneously. Both sets of coverage had been paying claims and processing renewals without any conflicts or duplicate coverage notices. Neighbors provided contradictory testimony that supported both versions of events. Mrs. Patterson from across the street remembered the Martinez family moving in during the summer of 2014 and had attended their housewarming party. She also recalled the property being vacant for months after the elderly owner's death and had seen Thompson showing it to prospective renters. Her memories included both scenarios as equally valid experiences, with no sense that they were mutually exclusive. The children's presence created the most compelling evidence for their family's legitimate residence. They knew intimate details about the house that only long-term occupants would discover. They remembered when the upstairs bathroom faucet had developed a leak 3 years earlier and which floorboard in the hallway creaked when stepped on. Their height marks were penciled on the kitchen doorframe, showing years of growth measurements that corresponded to their current ages and physical development. Carlos Martinez produced photo albums documenting his family's life in the house across multiple years. The images showed birthday parties, holiday celebrations, and casual family moments in rooms that Thompson recognized, but had never seen furnished in those particular ways. The photographs included timestamps and metadata that confirmed they had been taken over several years, showing the children aging naturally and the house's interior evolving through different decorating phases. These 10 encounters represent more than isolated anomalies or elaborate hoaxes. They form a pattern that suggests our understanding of reality may be fundamentally incomplete. From businessmen carrying passports from non-existent countries to families living in houses they simultaneously do and don't own, each case challenges the basic assumptions we make about the nature of existence itself. What unites these accounts isn't their impossibility, but their consistency. Witnesses don't report fantastical adventures or supernatural encounters. Instead, they describe mundane interactions with people who seem perfectly normal except for one crucial detail. They appear to exist in slightly different versions of our world. These aren't stories of magic or miracles, but of ordinary individuals caught between realities that operate according to different rules. The evidence suggests that the boundaries between parallel timelines may be far more permeable than science currently acknowledges. Phone calls from alternate versions of ourselves, photographs that show lives we never lived, and neighbors who remember histories that never occurred, all point to a universe where multiple versions of reality coexist in ways we're only beginning to understand. Perhaps most unsettling is the implication that we may all be living multiple lives simultaneously across different timelines, making different choices and experiencing different outcomes. The encounters documented here might represent brief moments when these parallel existences become visible to one another, offering glimpses into the countless versions of ourselves that exist just beyond our perception. The systematic suppression and classification of these cases suggests that authorities recognize their significance, even if they're unwilling to acknowledge it publicly. When hotel guests vanish from locked rooms, when airport security footage fails to record impossible visitors, and when academic institutions classify research that challenges our understanding of consciousness, the message is clear. These encounters threaten something far more fundamental than individual comfort or scientific orthodoxy. They challenge the very notion that reality is singular and fixed. If these accounts represent genuine contact with alternate timelines, then everything we believe about the nature of existence may need to be reconsidered. The world we inhabit might be just one of countless variations, distinguished only by the particular sequence of choices and events that led us to this specific version of history. The truth may be that reality is far stranger and more fluid than we dare to imagine. These encounters with people from alternate timelines remind us that the universe operates according to principles we have yet to fully comprehend, and that the boundaries between what is real and what is possible may be nothing more than limitations of our current understanding. If you want to explore more evidence of temporal displacement and see the physical proof left behind by people who claim to travel through time, check out our previous video, 10 Time Travelers Who Left Evidence Behind, where we examine the artifacts, photographs, and documentation that challenge everything we know about the nature of time itself. Click the link on your screen now. Until next time, when we find out how.